So in the Message Bible, it says, in one way or another, God makes sure that we will all experience what it means to be outside so that he can personally open the door and welcome us back in. God put us all in this earth, right? We've made it how we want it to be. All kinds of different systems we have in place to make it like it is. And all of us, at some point or another, even need mercy from somebody, some more than others. But all of us, regardless, have an opportunity to show mercy. And I think that's what Mr. Peterson might be trying to say here. We're all put in. We're all on the earth. God hasn't removed any of us. He hasn't taken any of us and placed any of us here or there so that we're better off than other ones. We might be better off because of whatever situations that life has brought us or that we've made for ourselves. But we still, even if we're not in that situation, can be merciful to others in some way. It might not be that I can whip out my checkbook and write a $500 check to some place asking me for money. Maybe I can't even give them $10. But maybe I can jump in my car and drive to Food Link and volunteer 4 hours of my time and sort cans so that people who can't eat can eat. That's mercy. That's what God has put us in. That's what he shut us up in. He shut us up together so that we can see that there's mercy. He's given us some mercy. He's opened the door back up so we can all see it. And some people might say, man, God, that is just not fair that you've done that to us, right? But it actually turns out to be very fair because we all experience what it means to be a human being. And what Jesus wanted us to see that it means to be a human being. And that means that we're all connected together and that we're all dependent upon each other. All of us. We don't like to think that way. We like to think we're independent and we don't need anybody, right? The richest person in the world, Jesus said that, if you're really rich, it's going to be hard for you to see because you are independent. You don't really need for things. You're in control. You got it. It doesn't mean that you're going to be happy and everything, but on a certain level, you feel like you don't need anything or anybody, right? But if you're on the bottom of the rung, it's completely different. You are more dependent on people than you might care to be, because none of us want to feel like we're dependent on each other, but we are, especially when it comes to mercy. And so I think part of what that verse is trying to say, what Paul is trying to say, we're all here together, and we all need God, and we all need each other. And that is God's intent, that we all need each other, because that's how we grow in him and in his son. So God is right there. And you might say, well, how is God showing mercy? How is he opening the door? Because I'm still in the situation I'm in. Well, God is there in you, ready to change the way you think, ready to change the way you see, ready to change the way you talk, ready to change the way you view the world and you view other people. God's there for that. And what is he going to do through you? Acts of mercy. Because of what you see in others and how you see you should be working together. So God gave us each other. We are all here on this planet, in this world, as Paul says, shut up, locked in. The earth was created by God. The world was not created by God. Who was the world created by? People. So everything that goes on in the world and all the systems of the world were created by us, not God. That's what we're locked up in. It's almost like in Romans 1 where he says, Paul says, the wrath was God saying, have what you want. If you wanted a system of your own and you want this to be how it is, then have it. It's yours. If you don't want me to be king and you want what a human king is like and brings what they bring, it's yours. Have it. But no, that's where you are. That's where you are. And you have to get through it and make it work. And if you don't want to make it work altogether, then you're going to reap what you're sowing, right? We are all here for each other, and that is mercy. And so thinking of those things, I have to wonder to myself, how merciful am I? And again, we'll say, I'm very merciful, except, right? Just like we said a second ago. Jesus had some confrontations in his day, right? Right, many. And those confrontations mostly resolved around a religious system, a worldly system set up by religious people. It had some founding and some things in it that God mentioned, but they made it all different, right? They created it to be something that they wanted it. This system was full of rules and expectations. And as with every single system in the world, without exception, it lacked the basics. And when I say basics, I don't mean toothpaste, mouthwash, and deodorant, or a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter and water. Human basics and necessities, such as compassion and mercy. Because many people, for whatever reasons, are going to find themselves in need of that. And every single world system that exists, on some level, mostly we would deem it on the high levels to be without mercy, without compassionate mercy, lacking for justice, lacking for love, kindness, and grace. Unless, of course, you're in our club. You're on our side of the street, our side of the tracks. You know, if you go, I work in Rochester, in the city, even though it's more Irondequoit, it's still addressed as a city. I know that if I go down Culver Road and I stay right on Culver Road and I get down to 490, safe. But I know that there are neighborhoods that are right off Culver Road, because I know people who live there that I work with, that are nasty, that I would never want to go to, because people there, a lot of them, aren't nice people. There's a lot of crime and there's a lot of things going on. That's the side of the street, right? And see, where I live, in the rural area, it's almost like there's one side of the street. There's bad things that happen. We've had bad people that live around, some bad people that have lived around us, but it's not because they were on the other side of the street, they just lived next to us. If you go in the city, I could be on one street and go 2 blocks away, and it's a different world, right? People on the other side of the street. Jesus wanted these guys that he was constantly in conflict with, and turn over to Matthew 9, because that's where we're going next. All these people that were lacking mercy and were lacking the basics in this system they were created, Jesus wanted them to step out of that system and experience something called humanity. Because what he was here to show them was they weren't living the way human beings were supposed to live. I think I mentioned last week, I watched a guy talk about the Beatitudes out of the Aramaic, and it was really neat, and now I can't even find it, which is really disappointing to me, because I learned something about Aramaic recently, that Aramaic is just like English and Greek, right? I have an NRSV. I love the NRSV. Lisa has in front of her the NASB. And the reason I give her that every morning is because I use Logos to make my lessons. And in Logos, my default Bible is the NASB. And when I read, I want her to be able to hear the words, because I know that it drives her a little batty if she's got a Bible that's different from mine. So Aramaic's the same way. I'm looking for an Aramaic Bible. And I'm realizing if I Google or go on Amazon that most of them are from one manuscript or text. But there's other ones. And I'm like, wow, is there a Strong's thing for Aramaic words? I can't find one because it's not commonly used. But it's interesting, what this guy said was that Jesus not only came to show us that as a human being, Jesus came to say, if you're not living like this, you're not a human being. What did they say in Star Trek? Mr. Spock would say that they would go to a planet and he would say they're carbon-based life form, carbon-based bipedal life forms. That's what we are, because we walk on 2 feet and we're carbon-based. That's what we are. But to be a human being, according to this guy, meant that you had to do the things that Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount. If you live that way, you're a human being. Everybody who doesn't live that way, it's not a human being. I'm like, well, that's pretty interesting. Well, there must not be very many human beings on the planet, right? Most people would say, no, that guy's nuts. But he's got a point. So in Matthew 9, Jesus is calling somebody to be one of his closest followers. And it happens to be the man who penned this book. And his name is Matthew. And he has a job that he's chosen for himself. And that job is as a tax collector, where probably he's doing pretty well for himself, got a nice place to live and doing nice things. And because he's collecting taxes for the empire, that's the oppressor, they don't like him. And he's one of the worst of the worst. And so they're asking, Jesus, why do you have things to do with these people? And he says, but go, in verse 13, go and learn what this means. I desire compassion, and the word compassion there could be mercy, and not sacrifice. For I did not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Compassion in the Greek is eleos. It's mercy. In many translations, they put the word compassion instead. So mercy, in this Greek word, if you look up the definition, it says especially active, doing. So when Jesus says, I desire compassion, when God said in Hosea, I desire compassion and not sacrifices, not your system, not your way of worshiping me. It's not what I want. I just want mercy and compassion from you. And we'll look at that a little more next week about the word hesed. He's saying, I'm not concerned that he's a tax collector. In fact, the point that he's a tax collector and what he's doing is dirty and rotten, Jesus knows that, makes it even more important that I have mercy on him. Because by having mercy on him, instead of condemning him, I'm going to bring him close to me, and I'm going to show him some things, and I know that this guy is going to learn, and he's going to change the way he thinks and acts, and what I'm going to bring about in him, in his heart and mind, is going to be beneficial to the kingdom that I'm here for and making. Well, it's already made, and giving to people and showing people, it's going to do something for them. That's why I'm being merciful to him. I want to be merciful to you guys too, but you won't let me. You're just going to be confrontational with me, and I'm going to be confrontational with you back and keep driving home my point of mercy. And maybe some of you will eventually follow along too. But I'm going to start with the people that know they need mercy. In Matthew chapter 12 and verse 7, he says the same exact thing. And my dad looked at this one last week, I believe. They're going through on the Sabbath day and they're picking grains and eating the grains. And of course, the Pharisees have to say, you're breaking the law. Just like Matthew is a loser, you guys are losers. And what does Jesus say in verse 7? But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. Because again, we are in the business of condemnation, condemning, right? And we don't like to think in that way when it comes to people that are needy and condemning, but as soon as we decide not to have mercy, we are condemning. In Matthew chapter 23, 4 different verses we can read here. We'll start with verse 13, which says, "But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you lock people out of the kingdom of heaven. For you do not go in yourselves, and when others are going in, you stop them." That is some pretty unmerciful living. Whenever I read this, for some reason, it's fun to read this passage because Jesus is yelling at someone else, right? Not me. But I have to stop and think. Am I locking people out of the kingdom of heaven? Sometimes, me, Dan Haley III, am I ever doing that? I could be. I do it how? How did they do it? With their list of rules and regulations and everything they thought they had figured out. And he goes on to say that as soon as you do this, not only is it bad for you, but it's bad for them because they end up the same way as you because you've just invited them into your club, into your side of the street. The kingdom of God according to you. In verse 15, he says, again, another woe. "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you cross sea and land to make a single convert, and you make the new convert twice as much a child of hell as yourselves." That's pretty intense, right? Because everybody, like I just said, that you're bringing in, you're turning into you. Your version of the kingdom. And your version of the kingdom can't possibly be God's version of the kingdom. And so when you do that, you're making those people in the same position that you are. What is your focus? What kind of things do you display? What kind of things are you talking about? Are you exclusionary? The Pharisees were rooted in a system, and that system was not the kingdom that Jesus was promoting. They wanted to bring everyone in, and according to Jesus, they were traveling long distances just for one person. And I don't know what exactly meant by that, but in my mind, I'm like, wow, I wonder how often they traveled to a nation just to see a guy who they knew was really rich to bring him in so they can get more money in the coffers. I don't know. Is that what Jesus is trying to say to them? You're doing things and you're making these people something they shouldn't be. Down in verse 23, it says, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint, dill, and cumin," legal things, right? For sacrifices. And not everybody had access to mint, dill, and cumin. Today, I can just plant in my backyard, or I can go to the store and all three of those are there, right? Almost all the time. In the very place where I work, I always want to have mint and dill because they're two common herbs that people want fresh. And you can go to the spice aisle and get cumin. Or you can go to the Amish store and they have little tubs of cumin. It's a great addition to chili. If you don't put in your chili, it's liberal amounts of cumin. And tons of chili powder. Got to have a lot of flavor. Cumin. And, where was I? Verse 23, "And have neglected the weightier matters of the law." Dill weighs a couple ounces. But there are things much weightier, and they have nothing to do with their system. Justice, mercy, and faith. It is these you ought to have practiced without neglecting the others. You blind guides, you strain out a gnat, but swallow a camel. In verse 24, he says, I just read verse 24. By focusing on all these little things in your mind that have to do with mercy, and who gets mercy and who doesn't get mercy, you're swallowing all of the bad because you're focusing on this little bit. And all of that bad is going to pour out. Do you know in Leviticus chapter 11, it talks about the things they can eat and not eat? They couldn't eat camels. Camels are hoofed animals and they chew cud. Dirty. You can't eat it. Right? And so Jesus says the camels, which there probably were there because they rode camels and they're huge. I saw a camel. They're massive, massive animals. And people ride these camels, and some people eat them. But the camel is unclean. So the idea of focusing on the little things like mint and dill and cumin, while they're focused on that, they're taking in the camel that they're forbidden to eat. And so in their mind, they would have heard that and said, whoa, what are you trying to say? Jesus is trying to say, all the things in your system that you think are important and who gets mercy and who doesn't get mercy of any of the three types are wrong. And Jesus says, woe is you. And the thing you have to wonder when you're reading this is, who is Jesus talking to? Because if you think and limit this passage to the exact context of Pharisees and scribes, then guess what? You've just missed the whole point. Because this passage is also talking about me, and it's talking about you. That's why when I said, sometimes when I read that, I think, wow, do I do that? Do I do this? I know the Pharisees were doing it, and Jesus was saying, woe to you if you're doing it, because you're going against what is supposed to be happening. And Jesus is saying to me, Dan, please be careful. Be aware. Because you have a greater effect on my kingdom than you realize. You might think that you're off by yourself, and it doesn't matter if you have mercy to that person or not. But by not doing it, you are having an effect on that person and what my kingdom is about. So you need to be careful. I'm going to go just a couple more minutes because I started late. Is that okay? Did we get Zoom back and everything? Oh, we are. So I don't want to intrude too much on the next session. But we're going to talk about compassion and mercy. And then I'll talk about the last point next week before we talk about God and being mercy. So a man named R. Kent Hughes, I think I've used his quotes before because it's part of the program. It has quotes by all these different people. Some we've heard of, some not. You can look him up if you want to know more about him. But he has something about compassionate mercy. And he says, grace is shown to the undeserving. Mercy is compassion to the miserable. Thus, the synonym for mercy is compassion. Mercy, however, is not simply feeling compassion. Mercy exists when something is done to alleviate distress. That's talking about compassionate mercy. Well, what is compassionate mercy? So you could turn there if you want. I'm going to start right now for time's sake. Luke 10, 25 to 37. A lawyer stood up and put him to the test, Jesus, saying, "Teacher, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" And he said to him, "What is written in the law? How does it read?" This is really cool. He doesn't say, how does the law read? He says, how does it read to you? And he answered, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." Something hopefully this man recited every morning when he got up. And he said to him, Jesus said to this man, "You have correctly answered. Do this, and you will live." But wishing to justify himself. Why does he have to justify himself? Because he's got the lists, the priorities in his mind, right? They might be according to the system he lives in. That might even be his own personal thing. And so he's got to justify himself to Jesus. And he asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied and said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho," because Jerusalem's higher than Jericho. Not because Jericho's south of Jerusalem, because really it's, I believe, kind of northeast. "And fell among robbers, and they stripped him and beat him and went away, leaving him half dead. And by chance, a priest was going down on that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Likewise, a Levite also, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side." Why did they do that? Because in their system, If the guy was dead, they couldn't touch him, right? Obviously, I don't know if there's a difference between what a Samaritan looks like and the Jewish guys look like, but obviously in their minds, this guy was not of them. He wasn't, they weren't going over there. They weren't doing anything for him. He was not deserving of mercy. But a Samaritan who was on a journey came upon him, and when he saw him, he felt compassion. And he came to him and bandaged up his wounds, pouring oil and wine on them. He put him on his own beast and brought him to an inn and took care of him. On the next day, he took out 2 denarii. It took a long time to earn denarii. A long time. And gave them to the innkeeper and said, take care of him, and whatever you spend, when I return, I will repay you. And Jesus asks, which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the robber's hands? And he said, the one who showed mercy toward him. And Jesus says, go and do the same. That is mercy. No judgment of the person that needs the mercy. Just go and do it. That's who we are in God's kingdom, as citizens of his kingdom. We have an obligation, an expectation from our God that we view things differently than the world views them. And so we need to get the list out. When I'm driving down the road and I see a woman on the side of the road with a sign, and I have $5 that I was going to spend on a coffee, instead of getting into the next lane at the red light, because I don't want to be in a lane next to her, because I don't want to see her looking at me, because I don't want to feel guilty, I should purposely pull to that lane. And I should give her the $5, because I don't know what she's going to do with it. But you know what? It doesn't matter. Jesus says, if you got it, give it. Gladly. And tell her, God bless you. I hope things get better for you. That's compassionate mercy. Amen.